So welcome back guys to another video, and today I'm going to be talking about my memories of the Sega Saturn. Now it's funny, the last couple of years I've been on YouTube, I've covered various consoles, my memories that followed, but one console I haven't talked enough about is the Sega Saturn, and it's kind of a shame because I really love the Sega Saturn. And to start off, I have to go back in the Wayback Machine of 1996 when I was inside of a Sears, and it's crazy thinking back then Sears had, video games and they had kiosks. Now they just have washers and dryers. But yeah, needless to say, I went inside of a Sears and it was Christmas time, and I played this new Sega console that I had no idea about because I knew about the Sega CD. I knew about the 32X, but the Sega Saturn, it really just came out of nowhere. And, back then, home console was so much of a simplistic thing compared to what it is now. Now we have, Digital Foundry dissecting 4K and 60 frames per game and consoles and comparisons. When back then, the only way that you would be like comparing a game is comparing it to the arcade. And that first game I ever played on the Sega Saturn was Mortal Kombat 3, and I was completely blown away. I could not believe what I was playing. I felt like I was playing an arcade game. I played Mortal Kombat 3 on the Super Nintendo, but something always felt kind of off. I think it was the music, because Sega Saturn had like this wonderful soundtrack that was very, very much more close to the arcade counterpart. So I played that. I also played Nights in the Dreams, and I was completely blown away by that game. Now the game's on rails, but I felt like that I had complete control for some reason. It was some placebo effect of how this game ran, and I really thought that Nights would be like the new Sega mascot. I was like, man, this is going to be huge, and unfortunately we only got like one sequel of Nights on the Wii, and the rest of it's just all cameos of Sega fanfare, but I was completely blown away. I had to like run to my mom, and I was like, this is what I want for Christmas. I want a Sega Saturn. And my mom, in like classic parent syndrome, was like, why do you want a Sega Saturn? You already have the Super Nintendo. And that was it. I never got a Sega Saturn. Eventually I wanted an N64. I didn't get that, and I finally chose the Sony PlayStation. That was the new console I got after the Super Nintendo. And and alongside, I felt like I made a better choice with the PlayStation, but for many years the Sega Saturn still allured me. I was still like, man, I would really love to have this console. And it wasn't until I started watching YouTube, and I was watching like Pete Dorr and Splatter Trigger, if you guys remember him, very old school, Games of War, where they were talking about the Sega Saturn, but they were talking about games like imports and RPGs and working designs, that company. I was like, man, I still want a Sega Saturn. That just like gave me more of the itch. And funny story, I met Devin, who became our drummer for Rictus Grimm, a really good friend of mine. I'm actually playing in a band with him now called Slamurai. And he had a Sega Saturn, and we had our first like epic game night when we first met, and we played Guardian Heroes. And this was a game that I read a lot on GamePro, and I always thought this game looked beautiful. I thought it was such great 2D hand-drawn sprites, and we're playing it, and I was just like, man, Sega Saturn still has that mysterious magic. And it was the Christmas of 2012 when Devin actually gave me his Sega Saturn. And it's still a console that I still hold on to this day, even though I don't really collect retro that much anymore. And sadly, it's because it's got a little bit of a catch. Sega Saturn is a little harder to emulate. You can burn discs, but they're not always foolproof. So this is a console that's retro that I still collect for, not as much as I would want to, because unfortunately the Sega Saturn games are kind of expensive, at least the ones that I want. And what's funny is the Sega Saturn also had a great way to play imports. It was so easy. You could just use an action replay, and you had this new door open of games that unfortunately Sega of America never brought to US soils. I mean, I don't know what it was about Sega of America, but they just did not want 2D games on the Sega Saturn. Maybe it just felt too primitive to them. Maybe they were really trying to ride this whole 3D polygon look. But I mean, there's a lot of great games out of Japan that you can play, that you can import, that don't even require a lot of, you know, knowledge of how to read Japanese. Now, if you're getting an RPG, of course, it's going to be very text-based, but you want to play a great version of Street Fighter Alpha 3, play the Sega Saturn version. It's also known as Street Fighter Zero 3, and the Sega Saturn just has this mysterious kind of thing that I love about it. I love the controller, I love the games, I just love the fact that, to me, I feel like the Sega Saturn is kind of like an arcade box of the 90s. It's got such a great timestamp on it. So that is some of my memories of the Sega Saturn, and man, there are so many great games, and this is where I want you guys to come in. Leave a comment below. Tell me some of your favorite Sega Saturn games. Tell me some of your favorite Sega Saturn memories. I love to hear your thoughts. Anyway, guys, if you want to keep in the know on the future uploads and future content of this channel, be sure to hit the bell. The bell is going to be right beside the subscription button, and this will email and notify you whenever there's a new video. Anyway, guys, as always, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and as always, happy gaming.
Can't get enough of Excess Gaming Podcast? Be sure to check out our audio podcast on Podomatic.com. You can also subscribe to us on iTunes. And if you have a YouTube channel or podcast you'd like to share, be sure to check us out on Facebook on our group page and join the community. As always, guys, thank you so much for all the support, and happy gaming.